Um, you can tell we're having fun. Hi, I'm Brad Lyons. I'm the president here at Christian Board of Publication, Chalice Press, here in St. Louis. Thank you for tuning in tonight. This is Traci Smith. This is who you've come to hear. Traci is the pastor at Northwoods Presbyterian Church in San Antonio, Texas. She's the author of this great book, Seamless Faith, Simple Practices for Daily Family Life, but most importantly, she's the mother of 2 boys, ages 3 and 4. May God have mercy on her soul. We were hoping to get a cameo appearance tonight, but I think the boys have better places to be tonight. But anyhow, that helps us get more time with Traci. Traci has had this book out for almost a year and a half, 2 years now. It's been a really good seller. So Traci, tell us just a little bit about how it was, what inspired you to do this, what your faith story is like, and how that's all led to Seamless Faith.
Yeah, so thank you everybody for tuning in, and sorry about our little technical difficulties at the beginning, but glad that you're here and so excited that you want to hear a little bit more about Seamless Faith. So there was a really simple event that inspired all of the ideas that came from Seamless Faith, and I talk about it in the book, but it was when my oldest son, Clayton, was a little baby, and he had his first cold, which is actually no big deal unless you're a new mother and you're like, oh my gosh, every little tiny cold and sniffle. And so I just took a little baby oil that was there and rubbed it on his head and did a little anointing like you do. And I felt better and my child felt better. And I thought, oh, this is a really interesting, it's an interesting thing to think about how being a pastor goes with being a mother. But I was a really busy new mom, so I didn't really have a lot of time to, put anything together. And I originally thought that I would write a series of blog posts about faith practices and parenting, and then I just started writing out what they would be, and I realized that there were a ton and enough to maybe make a book. And so I pitched the book to you, and you liked it, and so here we are.
and there was some help also from the Young Clergy Women Project.
Yes.
That has been a partner of Chalice Press for several books, and so we want to give them their props as well. Yeah. So we were going to start out tonight with just a little demonstration of one of the practices that's in your book. So I'll let you do that voodoo that you do so well.
Yeah, so I think I'm just going to take you through the different types. And so the book's divided up into a lot of subsections. So there's 3 main sections, and they're traditions. I explain that traditions are something that you can do regularly. So it's every week or every month or every year. And then I have traditions for holidays and traditions for every day. So an example of a tradition for a holiday that we just did was a Christmas tree blessing. And then a tradition for every day would be maybe a bedtime blessing or a nighttime blessing. And I can talk a little bit about all of those, but I don't want to go into too much detail about all of them. And then the third is ceremonies, or you could think of it as a ritual. So something that happens either as a milestone in your life, a new baby comes into your life, or a pet dies, or there's a divorce ceremony in there, which is a sadder one. And there's a whole chapter of ceremonies for difficult times, death, grief, loss of pets. And then the third of the book is spiritual practices. So there's a lot of ancient spiritual practices, which I know somebody had a question about that we're going to talk about later. And then more modern spiritual practices like meditation and things like that. So.
Okay. All right. So you wanted to share one example. That's at least one example. So
sure.
What you got?
The one that I do, that I tell people all the time, is the bedtime blessing, because I think we're going to talk about this later too. People are constantly saying, well, it's really hard to do these types of things because we're so busy, right? And but most parents have some sort of a bedtime routine with their kids. You take a bath, you read a book, you do some sort of winding down before you get to bed. And so I think that one of the only tools that we have in our belt is a bedtime prayer, right? But this is just a simple flipping of that. So instead of the child having to say a prayer, you just say a blessing to them. And in the book, I give some examples of blessing, of words that you can use, or you can just make up your own. So, you do get a cameo. Hello. You want to say hi to my friend Brad?
Hi, guys.
This is Samuel. And this is Clayton. Do you want to say hi to everybody? We're just talking about a bedtime blessing. What do we do with our bedtime blessings?
A fish.
You have a fish?
Rainbow fish.
A rainbow fish. Okay.
And I have Mickey
It's
Mouse.
time for you to go. Do you want to say hi? I bet Grandma's watching. I'm going to say hi to her too.
Grandma?
Yeah, you can't see her though. Do you want to say hi to Grandma though?
Yeah.
Let's say goodnight, Grandma.
Good night, Grandma.
Okay, bye.
I go.
Okay, no, you guys have to go for real. Okay. Oh, who does? You too? Okay.
Good night, Grandma. Good night, Grandma.
Hey, have your grandma good night.
He had to do it too because his brother said goodnight to Grandma. So just like the only one watching, perhaps. So we can take advantage of it.
Ladies and gentlemen, a special guest appearance tonight.
Yes. So as you can see, I was like, what do I do for the bedtime blessing? And they're like, rainbow fish. Well, we can talk about that in a minute. I have a funny story about that. So anyway, the bedtime blessing is one of the easiest ones, I think, for anybody to do starting at birth.
Yeah, they don't fight back much then. One of the great things about Seamless Faith is that it does age, is that it covers that whole gamut from birth, all the way up until high school and beyond. I'm looking forward to when I get to bless the new driver.
Yes, there is a blessing for your driver's license, which is a really fun one to write.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about this. When you mentioned a moment ago that you had this epiphany when you were blessing one of your characters there. And did you realize at the time, there's a lot of these rituals already in my life, or that this is something that would not be hard to do? And how can folks who are listening tonight and reading the book, how can they recognize those kinds of moments?
Yeah, I mean, well, they can read the book, but the other way. I think for me, so a lot of the things in the book are actually sort of baptized versions of activities that my mom did with me when I was little, right? So natural things that you do. There's an activity in there called meditation bags, I think we called it, where you find things in your house that will help keep you focused and meditative. And my mom did that with us when we were little, and she called them quiet time bags. So the reason that we called it Seamless Faith, after much discussion about what to call the book, is because we wanted to give this idea that faith, it's not like you have a moment where you say, okay guys, we're going to sit down and talk about our faith. But we want to try and incorporate faith into the everyday moments of our lives. So I don't know I know that when I did the little blessing when Clayton was a baby, I didn't think, oh, this is how I'm going to raise my children. But I think in talking to other parents, one of the things, when I talk about the book, there's a picture on a Newsweek cover, and it's called The Myth of a Perfect Mother. And it's got this mom, and there's all these arms coming out of her. Like she's got a frying pan and a workout shoes and like all these different things. And you don't want faith to be like another thing you have to fail at, right? Like, oh, great, now I'm not doing faith either. And so we didn't, when we were putting the book together, didn't want to market it that way. Like, here's a list of things that you have to do now in order to raise your kids properly. It's actually the opposite. These are things that you can do easily every day that fit into what you're already doing. There's one about looking at stars and talking about the God that created them. So that doesn't take a lot of added effort, maybe just to think about it and say, oh yeah, I can do that.
It's a certain mindfulness and awareness of the situations you're placed in.
Yeah.
Last week you posted on the Facebook posting for this event asking for questions from folks. And if you've got a question or an observation you'd like to make, some of you have already kicked in on this, feel free to add it to the comment thread that's below the window or to the side. We are watching those off to the side. But last week, the question came back from Amy. It said, families are well-intentioned, but also so crazy busy. How do families integrate faith building into daily and weekly life in ways that remain fresh and life-giving rather than yet another thing? I think that's what you were just getting.
Yeah, that's what I was just talking about. I think that you don't do that, and that you don't feel guilty when you're not doing it, right? So you sort of, all these things, I think, my kids are only 3 and 4, but I talk to a lot of people who have older kids and are trying to do this. So you don't, it's not like you do it perfectly. You know, we have this image that, oh, you know, it's going to be so great. And, you know, even some of the ideas in my book, you read it, you're like, oh, that's going to be so great. We're going to have this family moment. And then, no, like spaghetti is flying everywhere. And like, you just have to say, that's okay. You know, we're going to try it again. I talk a little bit in the book about that balance between forcing your kids to do things and saying, well, you have a choice. I think there's a balance between saying you must do this and then also being so on the other side where you say, well, it doesn't really matter. So to try and strike that balance that, yes, this is important to us, but we're not going to do it in such a draconian way that you end up resenting your faith. But that kind of strayed from the original.
Wow. Yeah. Good observation. So another question that came in from Sarah: how do you find the balance between keeping your kids sheltered and focused on God, yet not so naive they're unprepared for the real world where the biblical answers don't always fit the problems?
Yeah, so Sarah is actually a member of my church. So I would say she can learn this by coming to worship with us every Sunday. But one of the things that I say from the pulpit a lot, and I also say in the book, is to teach kids about mystery. And to teach them the word mystery. And there's a difference between, in the word mystery, you're not saying, I don't know, right? So, well, how is it that bad things happen? And, you know, when we prayed for grandma to be well, but then she's still sick, to say, I don't know, is different than to say, well, it's a mystery. And from a Christian worldview, the resurrection is a mystery. Everything that we proclaim is a mystery. And so I think, owning that instead of saying like, oh gosh, you have to ask somebody, you have to go ask Pastor Traci because she has all of those answers. You know, I think that's a key to sort of be in charge. Parents think, oh, I need to go to somebody else to have spiritual formation for my kids, but you don't, because you have the same questions that they do. And so to say, you know, that's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. And then also to not be afraid of doubt. If a kid says, you know, that kids are smart, you know, like that doesn't make sense. How did Jesus, you know, die and come back to life again? Just to say with them, like, that is really hard to believe, isn't it? And to kind of question with them so that they're prepared to engage in the world. You know, I forgot who it was. I think it's Andy Root, who was talking about how in the postmodern age of spirituality and kids, we have to embrace storytelling and teach our kids how to be storytellers. And that's a great way to prepare them for what's to come, is to say, you know, well, this is my story. This is what we do in my house. Maybe you do something different in your house, but in my house at bedtime, we say this blessing and do this thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mentioned a little ago, I'm getting ready to use the driver's license blessing, but I also have a freshly minted 6-year-old whose teeth are, I hope they come out soon. Man, there's one that's been hanging off your life for a month. But I think one of those great moments as a parent, but also as a person of faith, is trying to hear them enunciate what it is that they're trying to process. They can't quite figure out the words for it yet. Yeah. And so it requires a great deal of creativity on their part to try to understand these complex stories. And I know a lot of Christian education goes into trying to interpret these very deep stories for very shallow minds is not the right way to phrase it, but you understand what I'm saying. Yeah. Minds that can't process those deep stories yet. And so I think that's another thing I like about this is that you are in the job of translating these things. Mm-hmm.
We tried really hard to, this book is not a theory based book at all. It's all practical things to do with your kids, but it was written with a lot of theory behind it. So I drew on Fowler's faith development and made sure that we didn't put any practice in there. So in the practices, it says what ages the practices are designed for. So made sure to not put any practices for really little kids that are developmentally inappropriate for their faith development, because just as you go through a psychological development, there's predictable stages of faith development that you can go through. So if you have, my children are very literal, so we try not to talk about like Jesus being in your heart and things like that, because they will take that to mean that Jesus actually lives in your heart. And so you don't have to know all that to do, and you also, it's not like you're going to mess your kids up if you say that, but, to try and to keep in mind that kids develop in predictable ways. And one of them is a real questioning. That's a part of natural faith development, is to start questioning. And if you really push back against that too hard, you can miss out on a critical part of having a mature faith.
Yeah. And in the comments Paul just posted, with 4 kids, 2 of them are happy to articulate those complex stories, even at young ages.
Yeah.
And 2 are more tight-lipped and reticent to speak out loud. We've made room for both, never pushing.
That's awesome. Good job, whoever that is.
Yeah.
You're doing it well.
Yeah, and it's just like everything else in parenting. When you've got multiple, no matter if you've got 2, they're still going to be very different. You've got to be always on your toes.
Absolutely.
No 2 are the same. Sometimes the one isn't the same from one moment to another.
Right. Absolutely.
Traci, you've gone out, you've done workshops and led other folks through this, and are trying to help congregations and parents in general understand what you're getting at in the book. So tell us a few stories about what are the common threads you hear from folks that they're trying to wrestle through as they parent.
I will do that. Do you want to go back? Do you want to answer the other questions? Do you want to go back to those after this?
We can go back to that.
Okay. I just don't want to. I don't want people's questions to go unanswered. So, so thinking about what people say all the time. I think people say that they're busy a lot. People say that what I already said, they don't feel equipped. They don't feel like they know how to do it. They wish that they had a bigger, repertoire of things to draw on. So I do a lot of kind of like cheerleading when I talk about this book, saying like, you can do this. It's not, if I can do it, you can do it. And then I also hear from people about things that they wish that I had included in the book. So ceremonies that they wish that were in there that weren't. One of the ones, and maybe I'll just have to write it and put it on the blog, one that people really want to process as a family is a pregnancy loss. How do you process that as a family? Is there a way to have a ritual? And I didn't include that in the book, but I certainly could have come up with something like that. And then I also get ideas from other people's faith traditions. And one of my favorites is, I was at an event once when there's a birthday tradition in my book, but it's very different from this. And she said that in the Mormon tradition, I don't know if it's all Mormons or just this one small group, but when you get a birthday gift, you're with all of your friends on your birthday and you get a gift, you say about the gift, oh, this gift is from Brad. And one of the things I like about Brad is that, he's really funny and friendly. So, and then when you get the next gift, that's what you do. This gift is from Amy. And one of the things I like about her is that she plays with me. And I thought that was a really beautiful, I think I'll do that at a birthday party sometime, or at Christmas is a really lovely thing. So the other thing that people love to talk about, and I don't include it in workshops anymore because it derails the rest of the workshop, is pet stories. So there's a pet funeral in the book. Yeah. And if you bring up pet funerals, everybody talks about like the way they dealt with the death of their pet. And as I say in the book, I think that death of a pet is a great way to start teaching kids about death, because it's a very real loss in your family. And, what do you do? So those are some things, I think. Those are probably the top 5 things that come up.
Yeah, and in terms of, here we go. We're going to open the pet conversation. I think one thing that makes that unique is, everybody has when you have that death in your family, it's a person that you may or may not be able to relate to, but we've all had that.
Yep, everybody loves to talk about it. We could do a webcast just on pet funerals.
All right, we'll schedule that in a couple of weeks. And we'll have the tech stuff down.
We'll be better at the beginning.
Yeah, that's right. Joanna adds online, that's what we do with Christmas cards. We keep them in a basket and pull one out each night after our blessing at dinner. We talk about each family.
I love that. See? That's a great one.
Yeah, it is. What's the biggest surprise you've heard when you've been talking to folks?
Biggest surprise. I don't know. I guess I'm surprised. I shouldn't be, but I'm surprised at how we all feel inadequate. Everybody feels like they're not doing it right, and it makes me sad because I forget which researcher, you'll just Google it, but one researcher on parenting talks about the good enough mother or father, and how most kids thrive if you hit the good enough, the middle. And I think that's the same with your faith development. You don't have to be perfect. Just do your best, be good enough, and stop worrying so much.
And the people said amen. There is so much pressure to excel in everything, both on our kids and on their parents to get it right.
Yeah.
And we know we're human and we make those mistakes. And so it's you can never get enough reminders that it'll be okay. It's going to be all right. You're going to survive.
You turned out okay for the most part. You're fine. I mean, not you, Brad. I mean, like the people in general.
We're going to have a talk. Your royalty check's going to get lost in the mail. Okay. Can you tell we have a nice report, folks? Very good. So back to the questions. Elaine writes in, so much of teaching a faith centered on a book has to do with words and reading. How do you teach kids and families to embrace faith practices together when kids are pre-literate or even not yet verbal?
So I saw this question. I was going to count up all of how many in the book are for kids that are babies or little ones, and I didn't do it, and it'll be awkward for me to sit and do it right now. But I love that question so much because I wrote that book when my kids were babies. And so I had babies and little kids in the front of my mind and worked really hard, had to use my imagination more for older children. So one of my favorite ones for little kids is the photo prayer. So you just print out photos of people's faces and you put them on your lap and put a blanket around them, and then you just say, God bless grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, whomever. You could do pictures of the world and then just say amen. And the kids, it's like reading. You read to your children when they're babies, but they don't know how to read. They just know that
there's a book being
snuggly. Yeah. And so that photo prayer is one, the anointing that I do of my kids when they're sick. There's plenty of practices, even the things like the Christmas tree blessing and the Pentecost, there's a windsock. You can do all of these things with your kids when they're little, and there may be fun for you as the parent, and maybe the children don't even know what's happening yet, but then as they grow up, you can take pictures and show them, hey, we've been doing this since you were a baby, So I think it goes along with this idea of doing things over time consistently, that's the best I have for that. But there is a lot there. I don't want to say there's a ton, but there's at least 3 or 4 that are specifically written for babies and pre-readers in the book.
Well, I think we all know that moment when the kid recognizes that the information that I've been read every night, and I'm making it far too sophisticated, what I hear every night is encapsulated in this hard thing that flops around and gets put on a shelf.
Yeah. Right.
And when they are able to recognize that it's a book, that's that's a moment. That's, you can see the brain developing right there. And you know, obviously, as a publisher, we like your kids to like.
So you don't publish children's books.
Well, I would love to get back to doing that. Elizabeth writes in, how is your faith incorporated in disciplining?
Yeah.
So
that's another book. No, I don't. I don't believe in using God as a, like, God's gonna get you or you have to do something. I think you can get into really dangerous territory if you start using God as a punisher. So I will have to think about that more and come up with a more coherent answer. I think that the best discipline, this is probably a good commercial for, I forgot her name. So there's a writer, she's actually a childhood friend of mine, who writes a blog called Imperfect Families. You can look it up, and she has an ebook on discipline, on positive discipline techniques. And she's a children and family therapist. And she's also a Christian, has a Christian background. And so I would really maybe defer to her for positive discipline. And actually, after the live cast, I can go ahead and link to her on the Facebook page, because I like to refer people to where their expertise is. And I'm not a therapist or a parent coach. She actually is a parent coach. So I'll link to her.
All right. Pass
the ball over to her.
It's always good for a referral.
Yeah.
Thanks for your question, Elizabeth. Susan wrote in last week. I imagine we have a number of professionals sitting around this virtual table tonight. So Susan writes in, from the perspective of a director of Christian education, working with children and their families, how can the church best support families in the vital work of faith formation and practice? So
give them all the copy of my book. No, I'm kidding. I'm kind of kidding, but I'm kind of serious. I think to be able to have the type of conversation that we're having right now with your families is a great way to start. And this is a good place to put in the little commercial that I'm planning for this year to do 30-minute Skype conversations with churches that are interested, that the participants have the book. So if you want, I'm serious. If you want to have this conversation with your church, I will not charge you to do a 30-minute kind of training with your church. Just look me up on the Facebook page. But what I think directors of Christian education can do, and pastors and youth pastors, is to come up with some kind of training for your people. I have one, isn't it on the Chalice website? Maybe I have one. You can get in touch with me and I'll send it to you. I have one. I'm pretty sure it's on the Chalice Press website under my book too. But it doesn't have to be mine, but you're free to use it. Some sort of training for your parents where you say the kinds of things that I've said in this live cast. You can do this. It doesn't take a special theology degree. You do have enough time. Here's how you have enough time, and here are a few things you can do. And then the other thing that I mention in the book is some of these things, if you are a professional, if you're a pastor or a director of Christian education, you can do them in the context of your church. So getting back to the pet funeral, I actually do pet funerals for families in my church. Like, I put on the robe and the stole and do the whole thing and read the pet funeral from the book. And it's a really meaningful moment. I did one, I shouldn't laugh, but I did one for a fish once, and everybody was crying at the end of it. I mean, because it's just this reminder of how fragile life is and how precious all of God's creatures are, and there's other ones in there. There's the divorce ceremony is another one that I think if you are a professional and you have, when you have two parents that are divorcing, obviously for them to try and manage that divorce ceremony together requires either a high level of conflict resolution or a mediator. So you could take that ceremony and then do it as a professional in your church. So those are a few ways that I think DCEs can support. I'm about to launch our Lenten practices calendar. A lot of you saw it last year, and it was just a simple calendar of things that you can do every day during Lent. And so you can pass that out to the families in your congregation and then check in with them on Sunday. Hey, how did everybody do? Did everybody do these? Which one did you like? Which one was challenging? Things like that.
And God bless the DCEs out there.
Yes.
Because it's an important role, and so often during worship you're back in the back or downstairs, and we don't get a chance to see you as much as we ought to. And so thanks, hat tip to you all. Paul writes in, I'd love to hear from you or any others who have tried Lectio Divina in a family setting with kids.
Yeah, so put it on your comments if you've done Lectio Divina. So if you don't know what Lectio Divina is, it's an ancient practice of reading the scriptures contemplatively. So you read through scripture 4 times and ask 3 or 4 times and ask different questions each time. And I was thinking about this question. There isn't a modified Lectio Divina in the book, and I was looking at what I just put as the age for it in the book, and I put age 9 and up. And now I'm kind of thinking, maybe you could do a really modified Lectio Divina with really small kids. I just plugged Glennis Nealist's book, Little Love Letters from God, today on my blog. She has this little book of Bible stories, and then they're connected to love letters. And little kids like to hear, they say, like, read it again, read it again, read it again. And that is a form of Lectio Divina if you were to ask a different question each time. So that, I guess, is a really basic modified version with my own kids. I've done Lectio Divina with teenagers back in the day when I was a director of youth ministry. But with my family, my kids are too little, so I'd have to defer to others that have actually tried it. I'm sure it would be fun. You should do it, Paul. Let us know. Paul's a friend of mine. He's the one that asked that question.
Yes. We still have time for additional questions, so if you've got something you'd like to plug in, is that me or you? If you've got something you'd like to plug in, let us know. Traci, a moment ago you mentioned the Lent faith practices calendar. Where can folks download that?
Probably, we're working that out. Probably Etsy. It's probably going to be at the Etsy store, but it will be any place you can find me online. I'll be talking about that calendar. Twitter, Facebook, the email list, sign up. I'm trying to get it done by February 1st, which I realize is very late, but so goes it this year. Lent is so early. We just got the baby Jesus born, and now we have to start taking him to the cross. So February 1st, you can count on it. You can also use last year's and change the dates if you want, but this year's will be new and improved and updated. So one of the stories that I wanted to tell you when you were saying about telling you funny stories, and I think it fits in with this idea of how do you deal with kids that are too little to really know what's going on? And I think that sometimes it doesn't matter if they know what's going on, and we shouldn't get freaked out. So I was talking about the bedtime blessing. So with my own boys, I don't do the same one every time. I do something for a while, and then I get bored, and I'll do something else and do it. So for a while, I was blessing them and then doing the sign of the cross on their forehead. So saying, like, have a good night and sweet dreams in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And then after a couple of weeks, I stopped. I didn't do it. I did a different blessing. And Clayton said, Mama, you forgot to do that thing where you tickle our foreheads. And I was like, that's not really what that was, but that's what it was to him, right? Like, Mom says some words and then she tickles her forehead. I don't know. But those things eventually do translate over into church. Yeah. So that's one of my funny stories.
And they're also bonding moments.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, you can never get enough of those.
Yeah.
So, I want to shift focus just a little bit. Recently, you have been involved in some some other activities having to do with the immigration issues that we're facing in the southern part of the United States, and particularly in San Antonio. Talk a little bit about that and your involvement, if you would, please.
Yeah, so I live in South Texas, San Antonio, and we have a large number of families in detention. We can go into detail about the legalities of that if we wanted to, but we don't have to. And, you know, one of the things that I think is so important about faith and families is to teach your kids, we raise our kids to have faith, but we have to think about everybody else's kids, right? So, you know, to think about there being children in literally jail because of their parents' immigration status is really offensive to so many people. And since it's happening just an hour away from San Antonio, it is something that I have become kind of burdened and passionate about. We had a mother and her son live with us for 8 months and then continue to advocate against that practice of detaining families. So I don't know, someday we'll maybe write another book about that. But I think where it intersects with the book is the idea of living our faith out for others and not just in and of ourselves. You know, there are a lot of faith practices, and also in the Lenten practices, a full third of them are focused on the idea of service and giving to others. So, yeah, I don't like to talk too much about. I mean, I do like to talk about family detention to raise awareness, but it gets really emotional quickly, so I don't want to talk about it too much.
Well, you're bringing a social justice aspect to faith too, and I think it's hard to teach kids social justice, especially as complex as it can be.
Yeah,
I
think too. Yes. There are limited resources for parents, for Christian parents that are their theology is maybe more progressive or more maybe not focus on the family style parenting, and not to put anybody down or to, you know, different people have different styles, but there's not a really large kind of corpus of books that will talk about how to raise kids in the faith, kind of like getting back to Sarah's question, you know, how to raise your children in such a way that they grow up to be compassionate and open-minded with people that have views that are different than their own. And one of the people that actually endorsed seamless faith that I was so excited about is Sandy Sasso, who is actually a Jewish thinker and writer on children's spirituality. And her work and her books I can't recommend enough. The other thing I should probably do or talk about, because I say I'm going to do it and then don't, is to put together a list of children's books that are really good and appropriate and help with this kind of tribe of people that are trying to raise their kids in this way.
A good bibliography. Yeah. All right. So here's a fun one.
Okay.
Elizabeth asks, how do you approach Santa and the Easter Bunny?
Well, Easter Bunny, I've kind of ignored so far. I guess this is going to be the first Easter that I'm going to have to deal with Santa. So I was nervous about this because there's all this talk about like, oh, if you do Santa, then you're going to deceive your kids. But I was like, we're doing Santa because I love that guy. And I love the magic of, so I thought, well, how are we going to work this out? And so I asked my kids what the relationship was. And my 4-year-old said, Santa brings the presents for baby Jesus's birthday party. And I was like, that is better than anything I could have written. So yes, that is exactly what happens. But my husband is Colombian, and his tradition, it's actually the Niño Jesus, the child Jesus, that brings the presents. So I was really arguing for Santa this year because I really wanted to do Santa. But we might bring the Niño Jesus into it too. I have seen no legitimate research, and I've researched this, that indicates that telling your kids about Santa and allowing them to believe in Santa messes them up faith-wise in the future. There's like anecdotal things and maybe, but I'm going to have to see a serious academic study that says it messes kids up before I think. That's just me. So sorry if I'm like offending everybody out in the
I would love to see
webverse. But I think it's a fear that we have about lying. And if you think about the early Christians and their view on storytelling and truth, like there's so many ways that you can help bring that. I think if your kid gets old enough, if your kid's 10 and says, I don't believe in Santa, I think it's a myth, and you like insist, then you could maybe do some damage. But I have seen no legitimate research that says it's a bad idea. The Easter Bunny I don't like just because that guy's creepy. Like those Easter bunnies are like those mall Easter bunnies are like, and so I don't know what I'm gonna do about the Easter Bunny. Hopefully ignore him and make it all about Jesus on Easter. But we'll probably have to have some sort of candy. I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about it. I have like 6 weeks to think about it.
You're gonna make Easter all about Jesus?
I know.
What is the world coming to?
I know. Yeah, I think that one bothers me a little bit. Yeah.
Well, it is somewhat creepy. I'll give you that. We're going to jump back to the social justice question for a second. Jen wanted to follow up on that. She was, how do you talk to your boys about the social justice piece, like immigration detention or other tough things?
Well, my children are really young, so I don't get into it very much depth because they are so little. So when we had a mom and her son living with us, we did not mention that they came from family detention. We just said that they needed a place to live, and they were going to stay in our house until they could stay somewhere else, so you have to go with the age that your children are, and so right now I don't have a lot of firsthand advice about how to deal with it. I think the best rule of thumb is to answer the questions that the children ask and not additional information, because we have a tendency to want to do that. I mean, so if you think of like, the like classic things that make parents all sweaty, like, well, where do babies come from? Like, sometimes a child will ask like a really simple question and then the parents like taking it like 10 steps down the road, and that's totally not even what they were talking about. Yeah. So just think about what the question, this has been coming up a lot. We had this one visiting, this is kind of a tangent, but we had a visiting minister from Pakistan in our church, and he did the children's moment, and it was really intense. I mean, he was saying to the kids basically like, life in Pakistan is really hard and you don't know what you have. And, it was really, I was kind of like cringing, and then afterwards did a little debrief with the kids and tried to back it up a little bit and just answer their questions. So, children have this beautiful spiritual sensitivity, so you have to be careful not to tell them, I think, not to tell them too much. So since that children's moment, my son Clayton's been asking me a lot, like, is it true that some kids don't have a house? And so I just say, yes, it's true that some kids don't have a house, and it's our job to try and work to make sure that they do, and we'll say a prayer, but to try and can't be so heavy, that they're so sensitive, and you don't want to burden them beyond what they can bear, I guess. So that's a good topic for maybe a blog post or something else. Yeah. Yeah,
and I remember the first conversation I ended up having with my son was because we were listening to NPR, and I didn't realize he was listening to NPR.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I was knee deep in a conversation about the death penalty.
Wow.
4-year-old. Wow. Which was terrifying. But I think it worked. You have to speak slowly, think carefully, and you're right. Keep it succinct. Elizabeth, has a request. We're taking requests here on the hotline. She said, you mentioned putting together a good list of good children's books. Well, you also put together a list of good cartoons and shows for kids.
Oh, man. Well, I can tell. How old? How old, Elizabeth?
We'll see her type here in just a second. It's hard, isn't it? I mean, you think.
Yeah, so I can do some research. The one that I love the most for for my kids' ages, Daniel Tiger, which is based off of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and Daniel Tiger is the best. The Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood is like really diverse, and there's all of these songs about you can help, helping each other, and I'm not up on all of the kind of 700 Club conservative Christian type shows at all. But the secular ones, I can tell you which ones are really irritating and annoying. We watch those too. Yeah. But my favorite ones for preschool is Daniel Tiger. But those are good questions for bigger ones, and we can do some crowdsourcing maybe. Yeah.
Elizabeth said she was looking for recommendations on 6-month-olds.
Babies. Yeah. Well, I would say when my kids were babies, my favorite thing to do was to play them music. Mm-hmm. And my favorite music was a musician named Elizabeth Mitchell. She's not a Christian singer, but she's a folk singer, and you can look up her music. So soothing and beautiful, and it's good for parents and babies. And it helped me so much. So look up Elizabeth Mitchell and play her music to your baby, and all will be well.
Yeah, it is interesting. I've been through children's television for the past decade, and I've moved from I'm a Sesame Street kid. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, my kids just did not watch Sesame Street, and so they've landed at places like the Wiggles, which, while somewhat irritating, are okay. They treat each other fairly nicely, the annoying ones. And my youngest one is a PBS Kids person. KJ posts, go PBS Kids, and so we like PBS Kids. Support your local broadcasting. But that's where my TV lands in the mornings these days. Is PBS. Maya and Miguel has diversity on it. Little older than my kindergartner ought to be watching, because it always seems like one of the kids is getting in trouble and should have known. It really is the kind of thing where you do have to pay attention at least a little bit, and just see what's going on in that cartoon and that show, and see what the kids' ethics are and how it all fits together.
It's different for every kid too. I mean, we could talk about this all night, but it's different for every kid. I just had a thing where my child's school was showing Finding Nemo, and so I thought, then it must be okay for 4-year-olds. And we turned it on. We had to turn it off like 10 minutes into it because
that's the hardest part.
So scared. It was too scary. So you have to kind of know your kids. And there is a website out. I don't remember the name, so I kept doing this all night. There's a cool resource. I don't know what it's called, but about where they will take movies and TV shows and really break them down and talk about, what themes of violence or, gender equality or whatever, and will help you. So somebody else did that work.
Well, IMDb, which is a great website for just any kind of, does have a parent's guide on there.
Yeah.
commonsensemedia.org, Joanna.
There you go. Did you Google it while I was talking?
Thank you, Joanna, our contributing
listeners are like, we'll help you out.
Yeah, it's an amazing website. Movies, books, TV shows, an amazing website. And so many resources. And I think that may be one of the areas where, as we move into closing up that second decade of the internet, there's so much information that we didn't have, that our parents didn't have to deal with.
Yeah,
we were able to say, "Yep, okay, it's channel 13. That's PBS. That's what they'll watch."
That's all there is, right?
Yeah, and now there's 85 variations of Nickelodeon. Mm-hmm. So there is just so much to tackle out there and try to wade your way through it. You do have to be careful. So thank God for Daniel Tiger.
It's my favorite.
Yeah.
I'm gonna write that down.
I think we're just about to wrap up here. So if you have another question, send it in quick. Traci, any closing thoughts as we look back at the questions that are being asked? What, as you look at the big picture and see where we're going in terms of nurturing our kids' faith, we're part of a church that's in flux.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we get them to be ready to be faithful in a church that will probably not resemble the church they're growing up in?
Yeah. Well, that's why I wrote this book, because I think that we have to have a real strong connection at home and not just in our outside community, not just turn it over to our church to be the ones that translate our faith, but to be strong enough to do it ourselves and to be confident that we can do it. So I guess that would be my parting word, would be to I think of the book, a lot of times I talk about Seamless Faith as being like a recipe book. So if you're the type of person that you don't particularly like to cook, but your family needs to eat, so you just open it up and find the simple ones that you know how to do and do it, your kids will be nourished and they will eat, and there's nothing wrong with that. So use it that way. But if you like to cook and you like to improvise, then pick it up and use it as a launching pad for, creating your own or doing it your own way. Some people, I talk about this book a lot, and some people will say, okay, so like, I need it broken down. Exactly how do I do this practice? And I understand that, because if it was something else like, I don't know, engineering, I would need it broken down step by step, right? So that's what the book does, is gives you in the simplest terms how to do it. But then there are other parents that are like, oh, well, that reminds me of this, and it reminds me of something else that I could do, and then I'm going to talk to my pastor about this, and then they could, write the sequel to the book themselves, right? So I think that's my final word. I do want to remind people, since we're about to sign off, that I'm serious about my offer to talk to churches on Skype for a half hour. If you can coordinate it with me and you and your time, I will do it for free. If your people watching have copies of the book, that's the only requirement. So get in touch with me, and then I'm going to how many people are on this thing?
We've got 17 right now.
Okay, so that's not too many people.
Thank you.
So if all of you wanted to do it, I would schedule 17 talks with you. But if we had too many, if people that are watching, but I don't think that's going to happen. Even if you're watching this as a recorded broadcast, yes, get in contact with me and we'll go ahead and do it.
As we run out of time, we have been asked to explore the intricacies of the presidential race in 30 seconds. And I think
was that Steve Knight?
That's not Steve Knight. It's Kirk. Thank you, Kirk. I think you're looking for a different.
Oh, Kirk Moore. That was my youth minister growing up.
Well, wasn't that interesting? So here you are. You're talking about being a minister to youth, and your youth minister is haunting you still.
Yes.
That's a strong faith.
In so many ways, you have no idea. What?
Strong faith connection, and I really appreciate that. Mentoring, and those who teach us, we hope, have taught us well. And I think that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to equip parents and grandparents and other caregivers to teach the kids the faith that we're hoping they'll have. So we're greatly appreciative. Traci, thank you very much for your time and your insight, and we appreciate it. You can always check out Traci's website, traci-smith.org.com. Thank you. I knew if I guessed, I would have done it wrong. But anyhow, we appreciate Traci. I get to plug real quick. We do have another live stream coming up next Tuesday with Eric Law, who's the author of Holy Currency Exchange. Eric is a great speaker, having with a lot of wisdom on how you can find resources in your congregation other than money. And so if you've got time, that is at 2 Eastern, 11 Pacific, and you can fill in the blanks in between. We appreciate everybody that's been out there tonight. Thank you for toughing it out with us in those first 2 minutes as Traci was me, how computers work. We appreciate it. Have a great rest of the night, and we'll talk to you all later. Good night.
Bye.